This is one of those things we all know it's there. It's unavoidable. In fact, we're in a season in our church existence where we're starting to have funerals kind of compete with the number of baptisms of our kids. That's a weird time for us. This is a new generation. We're coming into a new season of life as a congregation where pain, suffering, the breakdown of the body. Hello, I understand that I am in good company in this group with one of these things on. People ask me, what happened? I just getting old. My will quit working. And this is preventative to try to keep from, well, we don't want to have to replace your will. So try resting it. And this is the only way they can keep all this rested. And so we're in the season where we're starting to feel the effects of the original sin. When Adam, who represents all men and women, took the fruit, took his own initiative, said, I'm going to take my chances and become my own God. And because of that, the whole world was cursed. The whole world was affected. The ground in which he used to be able to grow things with very little struggle now is cursed. You have the introduction of evil. Evil being this thing that we either choose to do, moral evil, or natural evil. The things that happen that kind of, why is this? This is so unnecessary. Why can't you just make this work? And it becomes part of the story. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to do kind of this overarching study of the Bible. Because we need to see God interacting in real life and in real time. And that honestly is why I am so much on the archaeological thing. It isn't just because my school was an archaeology school. This became incredibly important to me because through the material culture of the worlds that the Bible was written in, we find our own story in there. And we start to see how God chose to interact with people just like us. Maybe different time, different circumstances, different culture, but certainly the same impulses. And so when we study the scriptures from this kind of big picture, 30,000 foot view, you'll be able to see our 21st century issues that we're dealing with right now. You know, as we sit with friends and brothers and sisters who are now confined to wheelchairs, and this brother or sister has done nothing but help the kingdom grow all of their adult life. And now they're like, did I do something wrong? You know, it's watching those that have a great relationship with God, all of their adult life kind of come into this season where now they're saying, is it okay if I feel like God has hurt my feelings with how all this has turned out? ALS? Really? Is that how? And we start, and it's this, man, this heavy topic. And so, I'm giving you kind of a preview of what the campus got last night. So when we deal with this topic, do I need to turn off my brain in order to believe? That's how some would choose to try to deal with it. Well, let's not talk about that. Let's worry about the things we can understand. And not worry about the things we can't. And that's fine. But I think for most of us, that only works for a little while. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Yes, it is, but it's not the fulfillment of wisdom. It's supposed to start there, not just stay there. You know, because we have evil. And when we speak of evil, at least the way I'm defining it, I'm speaking of it from the full spectrum. I want to talk about natural evil, things that happen in the natural world that you just kind of go, whoa, that's serious. Natural disasters, cancer, you know, the things that are way out of our control, that weren't based off human choice or human activity, they just happen. So some of that is just evil. You know, but there's also moral evil, which is a little bit more accessible for us because we deal with sin. We're trained. We're disciples. We know that, man, in order to get up out of sin, we got to repent. We are so far ahead of the game than the rest of the world that thinks God is just going to be this genie in a bottle. We recognize that we've brought on a lot of hurt on ourselves and on others, and that the world reflects a much larger series of decisions that man has made. And so we have a perspective that makes this topic a little bit more accessible, but it doesn't make it necessarily easier. And of course, for the campus students, I kind of highlighted the fact that, your faith has to have more substance to it than your faith that one time in Santa Claus, where you're just believing because someone told you to. This is the turf where people get tested. This is where brothers and sisters struggle the most when they really start to engage. They kind of go, okay, so do I either need to unplug my brain and just kind of have this, okay, let's just go with it, kind of like Isaac in the Old Testament. That guy was so chill. It's sort of like, hey, Isaac, we found you a wife. Okay. Father, I see the fire and the knife, but where's the sacrifice? Yeah. God will provide the sacrifice. Okay. This guy was chill. But he might have been simple. I'm not so sure his faithfulness was all that deep. He could have just been that way. But I feel like sometimes when it comes to this topic, we struggle because we kind of go, do I have to believe like that? Because the truth is, we know God to be all of this. God is all powerful. God is all knowing. God is perfect love. He absolutely is. I will not back off on that. And you shouldn't. But that is what the big ask is. Can God be all these things and evil exist? And this is something all the great thinkers throughout Christendom have said over the generations. It was probably the most popular response to evil was as early as Augustine, as he wrote his corpus. Irenaeus also, we're just breezing over this. Also had a response. Early Christian thinkers have thought about it. C.S. Lewis, I think, as typical C.S. Lewis does, just finds an easy way to say all the things that scholars have been saying for generations, but does it in a way that even I can understand it. Here's the tension. If God were good, he would wish to make creatures perfectly happy. And if God were almighty, he would be able to do what he wished. But the creatures are not happy. Therefore, God lacks either goodness or power or both. That he is restating the argument that attacks our faith. And I like that. That's real. Because he's taking arguments that go all the way back to Epicurus in the 3rd and 2nd century BC as the great critiquer of not just faith, but not just Jewish faith, but just faith in general. This idea, Epicurus was one of those guys where he was a philosopher and he recognized that the world has a spiritual realm. He was not an atheist. He recognized there probably is something outside of us that is impacting our day-to-day. I give you that. But he goes, I can handle God's being like Zeus, adulterous, sleeping around, not even really concerned with who he's sleeping with. Causing all this chaos because of his blunders. The world makes sense with gods like that. I know that sounds crazy, but to him it did. Because the problem was, if there is a God that is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, and evil exists, that makes no good sense. And so he came up with the Epicurean paradox, which just is this perfectly fun flow chart that just kind of, again, takes you through a little thought experiment. Evil exists? Yes! Can God prevent evil? No, that he's not all powerful. But yes, he can. Okay, does God know about evil? Like, is he aware of what's happening when evil happens? No, then God is not all-knowing. Oh, wait, then yes. Okay, well then, does God want to prevent evil? No, well then he's not all good. Well, okay, you're right. Yes, he does want to prevent evil. Then why is there evil? And then maybe the Christian response to that, or even the Jewish response to that would be, well, because there is a Satan. Okay, well then why doesn't God just destroy Satan? That's a really good question. Okay, so because he needs to test us. Doesn't an all-knowing God already know how we're going to do in a test if he decides to test us? No. Well, then he's not all-knowing. Well, then yes. Okay. Could God have created a universe without these? No. Well, then he's not all-powerful. Well, yes. Then why didn't he? And then, of course, the only acceptable answer is free will. Choice. And of course, Epicurus would then try to twist that back and say, well, then couldn't he have created a universe where you could have free will and not have evil? And if you say no, well, then his argument would be that he's not all-powerful. If you say yes, then it goes back to why didn't he? And thus, Epicurus reveals his Achilles heel. Get it? Because can you have free will without the choice of doing wrong? Teenagers will tell you. Yeah, they know. Well, you have a choice to clean your room. Oh, sure. I choose not. The repercussions of me not cleaning my room, you're saying, oh, I technically have a choice. Not much of a choice there, right? Yeah. And but then the question goes, is freedom really worth all that? The freedom to choose, is it worth it? And I would say no if it was just freedom. But there is something that we know God is that makes it worth it. And that is, love is worth the risk. Love is worth the risk. And because love is worth the risk, we understand why we have children. Because if you really mapped out how much kids cost, how much emotional damage they do to the parents, how much they drain the very soul out of you as they're off having a good time, and you're worrying, God, please don't let anything happen. Please don't let anything happen. Like, hey, Dad, I'm just going to run down to, especially when there were teenage girls going to downtown Chicago. Like, Dad, we're just going to take the train. Okay, God, please. When you consider that, why do we keep having kids? Love is worth the risk. It just is. And plus, they might give us grandchildren. Can I get a witness? Oh, yeah. It's worth the risk. But that's not the story I want to tell you today. I want to tell you the ongoing saga of how God gets to this. Not because he didn't start here, but because he needed to show mankind what love is worth. And that's what we're going to do together today. So all of that was set up for what we're about to do. You still with me here? You still good? Do we need a break? Do we need a stretch? Okay, let's keep going. All right, so I did all that. We're going to talk about a series of covenants. And for some of you guys, this will be a review of different things you've probably heard in different ways, but have probably never seen it all put together the same way. So if you're taking notes, go ahead and draw a cross or whatever that is. Draw one of those because you need to see the story as it's unfold. So the first covenant that God makes, once mankind is out of the garden and out of paradise, is the covenant of the bow. We love that. We're grateful for Bema to bringing that back into our attention, although it's always been a part of our dialogue. But the exciting thing about this is that it starts at a time when evil has now reached an apex. And pain and suffering are all around. So when human beings began to increase in number on the earth and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married them as they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. When the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, they had children by them. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe them from the face of the earth, the human race I have created, and with them all the animals and the birds and the creatures that move on the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Yeah, you ever heard that argument? Why doesn't God do something about evil? Well, he has, and no one liked it. Our God is not sitting on his hands going, oh, I wish I could do something about evil. He has done it before. And the way God tends to work, he goes, I'm going to do things once so that I never have to do them again. I am going to set the pattern of what evil produces, the consequences that it should bring. I'm going to do once what I hope to never do again. So mankind is filling the earth. You have all sorts of crazy wildness happening with the sons of God coming into human women. And everyone goes, what's up with the Nephilim? Yeah, I think it's just that. I really believe they were angels, like a good Jewish reading of the text, angels of God who took on human form and somehow mated with human women, produced these freakishly awesome guys where you kind of go, were the Greeks really that creative, or did they have some sort of proof text? Did they have something that gave them the idea of all these demigods and things like that? I'd say, yeah, it traces pretty well that at one time, there was a time when you have these freakish beings, these half-breeds of the divine and human messing around. Meanwhile, humans are just going free willy with everything they wanted to do. No restrictions, evil all the time. All they could think of when they woke up was doing harm. And so God goes, yeah, that's what happens when men choose and creatures that I gave free will to choose to rebel against me. And so he wipes it out. Which is that how we want God to deal with evil in the world? Well, let's just wipe it out and start over again. Did Thanos have it right? Or maybe we should just kind of sweep it away for its own namesake? And so God decides, no, that's not what's going to happen. And so after the flood, he starts to make this covenant with Noah. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood in it. And from your lifeblood, I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting for from every animal. And from each human being, too, I will also demand an accounting for the life of another human being. You ever wonder where kind of globally this idea that human life has value comes from? I mean, because everyone seems to agree with that. Every culture, no matter its religious backgrounds, no matter its ethics, they all have some sort of line that you're not allowed to cross when you kind of treat another human a certain way. Where does that come from? Where does that impulse come from? It comes from something outside of them. I'd say it comes from the days of Noah. Whoever sheds human blood by human shall their blood be shed, because they're all from Texas. You kill a Texan, we kill you back. You know, that's just how it is. Yeah. But for God, for the image of God has made humankind. Now, watch this. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number. Again, we have this idea of creation again. Multiply on the earth and increase upon it. Then the Lord said to Noah and his sons with him, now I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those who came out of the ark with you, and every creature on the earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all of life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And then God said, this is the sign of the covenant I'm making between me and you and every living creature, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow, or in Hebrew, I have set my bow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. So we have this bow. Which has in its language, again, rain was a new thing. Water falling from the sky was brand new. That had never happened before. You have moisture in the air in ways that had never existed before. And then God goes, okay, here's something I want to remind you. From this day forward, every time you see this sign, you'll be reminded of my promise to you. Never again will this happen. Now, normally a covenant is between two parties. It's an agreement. It's a contract. It's one of those, okay, you do this and I'll do this. And so he says when he enters kind of gives us this idea of there is going to be a bow. They don't think about rainbows and kind of blue skies and rainbows and sunbeams from heaven. That's not what they think. They hear the word bow, they think of a bow. They think of deer season. They think of, this is a weapon to end life, which is exactly what God is communicating. He goes, I will set my bow in the sky. And of course, it's a beautiful bow and it's got colors. Yeah. It doesn't have purple or pink, but we'll go with that. It's a bow. It's set in the sky. But what's the bow aimed at? Yeah, no, it would make more sense if this is a covenant, old school style, that the bow would be pointing down to earth. Yeah, go ahead. Choose evil again. This is the sign. The bow's looking right at you. Yeah, I mean, that was the idea in the ancient mind of what God was communicating through this sign of the covenant. And God was saying very clearly, this covenant is something you cannot fulfill. You cannot stand under its terms. I will set a sign that shows you who will satisfy this covenant. The bow won't be aimed at you. It's going to be aimed at me. It's the gospel according to Noah. That even though the reality is evil has had its reign on the earth, God ultimately will end it, but not through the destruction of everything, but through the absorption of the failure of His creatures to fulfill this covenant. He will take the hit for you. He will take the attack for you. He, from the very beginning, is trying to paint a picture in the sky of saying this is the only way creation's going to work. My integrity and my righteousness will be honored, but it will not be satisfied by taking it out on you ever again. Do we deserve the flood? Absolutely. Would He have every right to do it again? Absolutely. Could He invert the bow and just say, well, you done did it now? All we could say is, yeah, you have that right. But what He does with that right is that He turns it towards the sky, making us go, wow, he's shooting at something besides us. And God's like, yeah, it's coming towards me. I take the hit for you. So you're sitting in circles. You're in not super conversational clusters. Some have a few, which is great. Others have quite a few. But why don't we take a few minutes and kind of go, okay, if this was the plan from the beginning, this is the first covenant, what should we expect God to do next? Now again, I know you guys are Bible students, so don't cheat. But if this is the first covenant that you're getting from God in this idea of dealing with evil, what do you expect God to do next? You have 3 minutes. Ready, go. What were some of the guesses? What were some of the thoughts of what God? Okay, in the back.
I'll take a stab at it.
Okay, do it.
The Bible says there is no remission of sins without the shedding of blood.
Okay.
So is it reconciliation? God wants man to be reconciled to himself through Jesus.
Okay, well, yeah. I mean, something's going to have to happen. What else? What else did we come up with? What should God do next? Yeah.
We kind of took like a zoomed in approach and thought, well, there really aren't a lot of these laws. So it kind of seems like you're a large group of people and you're doing these things and it takes this enormous amount to get God's attention maybe. And so it seems like as the story moves on, maybe it's zooming in on the individual. So it's individualizing, codifying laws.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm giving up on the whole of humanity. Let me just find one. Okay. Interesting thought. Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing. You would redefine the law.
Redefine the law.
Redefine the law and say, okay, here it is.
Yeah, I mean,
Put it right out to the forum and say, this is what I expect. These are my expectations.
sure. Yeah, because up until this time, we don't have law yet.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, then it brings up the other philosophical question. Did God have the right to destroy mankind without the law? How dare he? We'll talk about that later. Okay, all of those are fantastic guesses. Anyone else have an answer that they're just like, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. I got to share that.
We didn't have one of those.
We, oh, we didn't have that? Because there's usually in a crowd this size, there's always that one guy that's just got, you know. And then what I do is that I take that and then use it in St. Louis and they think I'm so funny. Yeah, so here's the first covenant God makes with creation. He goes, never again. And that's not based on your faithfulness. It's unilateral. It's one directional. God goes, let me take the pressure off you. I will absorb all the mistakes I know you're going to make. So what would God do next? And I love the big picture things, like going, okay, well, let's not try to change everyone's thinking from this point forward. Here's what God decides to do. He decides to go off and pick an old dude. And he's going to take, in fairly quick succession, he's going to take these three individuals and start to create the pattern that has to be satisfied. He's going to start with Abraham, then he's going to go to Moses, and then he's going to finish in this time period with David. He's going to start with one. You're right. He's got to just, let me get one. And notice who he picks. He picks the one that time has already passed his by. His prime is long gone. And how sad it is the way Sarah's described. Like, she was well past childbearing years. Like, do you have to add the well? In a language that has very limited adjectives. They found one to describe Sarah. That's not fair. You know, but the idea is supposed to be great. He chose one that no other spiritual being with free choice would choose if you're going to start over and build something great. He intentionally chose the least of people. Now again, Abraham was a baller. His family was doing quite well in Ur. It wasn't like he was kind of just, and he doesn't have anything going for him. He had his time. He had enjoyed the fruit of the best man can do at that period of time. And God goes, are you willing to leave that? And Abraham says, yes. Abraham promises him a descendant. And he also promises him great reward. But I tell you, when all you want is to be able to pass your name on to someone else, and all you want is to know that your family tree doesn't end with you, that promise was worth following, even though he couldn't explain to his wife where he was going. Which I always go, man, that discussion, the longer I've been married, the more that discussion impresses me. Every night, honey, is this the place? No. Well, when are we going to get to the place? I'm tired of paper cups and paper plates. I want to set out my good china. I want to set up a table. Are we there at the place? No, this isn't the place. Well, what are we going to do tomorrow? I don't know. Probably go somewhere else. You know, that impresses me more every day, because I know that would not fly in the Moulden house today. So God makes a covenant with Abram that's all about land. And God is very strategic about this choice. I'm going to choose one who is well past his prime, who no one else would choose to build a nation out of. I want him because that makes it obvious who's doing the work. But then I also want this sorry scrap of land right here. Now again, look at these nations that are all around. These are big, powerful kingdoms. And God goes, yeah, I don't want any of that. The Nile and all of its technology and advancement, yeah, no, I don't want that. Turkey and all of its natural resources, Syria and all of its resources, Iraq or where Abraham was originally from, wealthiest kingdom in this time. He goes, I don't want any of that. I want this little scrap of land that's right at the crossroads of the entire world. All trade, all industry, all supply comes through this little scrap. And God goes, that's the land I want for my new nation. Not the biggest, not the most impressive, but it is the most strategic. Because from there, the world will know what God, the real God, is really like. So he makes this covenant with Abraham that was going to be right at the crossroads of the world. And he starts it with this. It starts with that promise, but then the covenant comes in Genesis 15, and I'm sure on some level you've heard all this before. Again, my goal isn't to teach you new stuff, but to show you the story in succeeding order. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. I do want to pause here just for devotional sake. When you kind of go, what is God looking for? What does God want? I still think this is it. What does God want to be to you? He wants to be your shield. He wants to be the very thing that you turn to when pain, suffering, and evil come. He wants you to stop turning to the bottle, stop turning to your habits, stop turning to stream binge watching. He wants you to stop buying stuff on Amazon as your source of comfort. Stop going to food as your way of coping. Stop doing that and turn to something that will actually protect you. I'm your shield. And what he wants to be for you is your very great reward. Because he wants to give you himself. That was just a bonus. That was other tour guides won't tell you that. But Abraham said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. Okay, now, do you sense the tension coming up here? I mean, I think Abraham has sat in this place where like going, God, you made a lot of promises. I hadn't seen you come through yet. It's been 20 years, still don't have a kid. Still on the move with my wife who asks me every day about it. Abram, do not be afraid. I am your shield, your great reward. Yeah, you hadn't given me a kid. Who's going to inherit all this great stuff? I appreciate Abraham being real. And then it says, and Abraham said, and again, when you see that repetition of Abraham said, that means there's no response. So he's talking to God, lays this complaint, even does it in the form of a question, giving God an obvious way to answer. And God stays silent until he can't stand it anymore. You've given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. He ain't backing off this bone. He's got it. He's just gnawing on it. Like, I got a bone to pick with you, God. To which then the word of the Lord, always got to pay attention when that happens. Then the word of the Lord. You know, I always like that Elijah, the great prophet Elijah, didn't hear the word of the Lord until he confronted Ahab, the unrighteous king. It's funny because we have no track record of Elijah up until he puts a bony finger in the king's face and says, "Until I say so, no rain." Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah. It's like he had his Bible. He goes, "I know the consequences when we act a fool. And I'm calling God on it." And God goes, "I got you, man." Then the word of the Lord came to him. "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is of your own flesh and blood will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Again, he took him outside and said, then he said to him, God, just let Abraham gaze. Look up at the stars. Count them if you can. I don't know how long that pause was, but it must have been enough until Abraham started to feel the awe. So shall your offspring be. Abraham believed the Lord, and it was accredited to him as righteousness. He also said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur, out of the Chaldeans, to this land to take possession of it." But Abraham said, "Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?" So the Lord said, "Bring me a heifer, a goat, a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon." Abraham brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite of each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure." When the sun had set and the darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, "To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of the Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Canaanites, Kenizzites, the Kadamites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites." I know. All the ites were in the house. You know, and you've probably seen this picture before. It's the famous one from Andrew Murphy. Just such a great graphic. Plus, I just love Abraham looking cautiously over the pieces. You get the idea. It's a covenant, and it's a covenant which they all understood. You know, you walk through, the other party walks through. If you break the covenant, they get to make you as one of these. It's one thing if Tracy and I are making a covenant over a land dispute, and we're kind of go, "Okay, I'll never cross this boundary into your turf again. And if I do, just make me like one of these things." Yeah, I mean, it's one thing if it's Tracy and I. But what if it's with God? You know, if I'm making it with a fallible second party, okay, there's going to be some fudge room here. You know, did we really draw it like that? But when you're dealing with a divine being, who's making himself known to you, who is promising you this land, this descendant, and you know there's not a chance you have already yelled at him. You have already, you brought this on yourself by throwing that hissy fit that you did earlier in the chapter. This is the reason you already are kind of going, oh man, and he cuts the covenant and he's waiting and the birds are coming, oh, get away, God's coming, and he's having to deal with all of his fears and anxieties, and then a deep, dreadful darkness comes on him. And then he just kind of go, oh, okay, what does this mean? And then God knocks him out. And then in his place, it says a smoking fire pot goes through the pieces. This is an early bronze fire pot. This is what that looks like. And this fire pot was the most important tool in the nomadic lifestyle in that day. The nomadic lifestyle that Abraham was currently living in. This fire pot was the way that they transported fire from one camp to their new camp. So what you would do is that you would take a little bit of wool, you stick that down in the bottom of that thing. Then you would add some coals, when it's burning down, it's called an ember. You put those embers in there, and you kind of wait till it gets good and smoky. Then you put a little bit more wool, and then you put a little bit of animal skin. Then you put another layer so that it's all this. And what you're doing is that you're building this potential fire to go. It has just enough oxygen to keep it smoldering, but not enough to let it ignite. The ropes would go around here, so you wouldn't have, because that thing would be hot. You would have someone whose only job it was to hold the fire pot. This is what walks through on God's behalf in the pot, because God was trying to show Abram who he was. I am the most important tool you will ever have in your life. Because whenever I am always burning and I'm always ready to work. All you have to do is turn to me and turn me over. And baby, when I say I'm your shield, I'm your shield. And you will have home and hearth and safety, even if you're in an unfamiliar area with me. You will always have home and hearth and safety in any area as long as you're with me. God says this is not based off what you do, Abram. Because again, a second item went through in Abraham's place. It's almost like God knocked out Abram because that guy might be so ambitious, he might actually think he could pull this off. So God didn't allow it. In fact, it says a blazing torch went through. And I do believe it could be the Scooby-Doo kind, where they had a rag and they ignited it. Okay, Scoob, let's go. I think it could have been that. But, we are dealing with early bronze people. And so for them, this is a Canaanite torch. It's a lamp that has 4 wicks that are all lit. And again, this has a spiritual side to it. They would always light the wick to the north first, then to the south second, to the east, and then to the west. It was kind of an expression of no matter what I do, I honor all the gods to the north, all the gods to the south, all the gods to the east, all the gods to the west, because as I flex this puts out quite a decent amount of light. And of course, the wicks ran kind of crisscross, just like this. Across this, and this could burn for a long time with those 4 wicks going. And, again, didn't produce like this kind of light, but, if you're in a dark place and no city lights going on, you hold that thing up, it's a blazing torch. Blazing torch, another way, multi-flamed, is why I have a good feeling this is exactly what went through the pieces. Now, again, other scholars will argue with that. I'm like, whatever. I think the point is something representing Abram went through on his behalf, and it was a light. And if this has anything to do with it, it's the light of the north the south, the east, and the west. It's the light of the world. Went through on Abram's behalf to satisfy what he could not possibly satisfy. One that says, if someone breaks this covenant, I will become like one of these. So we have in Genesis 15, the gospel according to Abraham. Something resembling light was going to walk in his place so that he did not have to suffer the consequences of a covenant he could not possibly honor. And because of that, we have a unilateral covenant with Abraham. It's not based off his faithfulness to the terms. It's going to be based off the fire pot and the Canaanite lamp. It's going to be based off something other than himself, something that's going to fulfill the integrity of the covenant, all the way through to its executions of its punishments, but it will do it on behalf of Abraham so that he has all the benefit, but none of the cost. So it's the covenant of land. So that's Israel. That's the future temple. You know, so there you go. Yeah, everyone can see that, obviously. Maybe I should draw a tree.
Should use the green one.
Okay, there. Now we get it. Okay, so you have the covenant of land. Okay, so now we're starting to see kind of God in action. So he's moving through generations. He's jumping ahead. You know, he started with the complete annihilation of the world, saying this is what evil and suffering deserve. This is what I should do every so often just to straighten it out and start over. But he goes, I'm not going to do that again. From now on, when that gets to that point, I'm going to aim the bow not at creation. I'm going to aim it at myself, and then I'm going to turn it loose. Okay, so what should God do next? I know, let's shrink it down to one old dude and his wife who can't do it on their own. They have no shot at making this happen, so they have to do it through me. I'm going to make a covenant with him, but I'm not even going to let him be a part of that covenant. I'm going to go through for him, so he's going to get the benefit and reflect me to a hostile, suffering world. Okay, so we now have two covenants, the bow and the land. So, in your mind, if you're God, what should you do next? Okay, this time you only have 2 minutes to have this conversation. Because I'm mean like that. Ready, go. Now, I realized I asked you to discuss something while giving you the answer right up there the whole time. I know, what? The answer. So, and you just kind of count that. That's kind of what grace is like. But what were some of your answers? What were some of the highlights of your discussion? Okay. No one wants to. No, okay. This table right here, because you have no fear. Someone on this table right here. Yeah, I knew Sam was going to say something.
We talked about at our table kind of the analogy of taking one McDonald's and making it 1,000.
Okay. I feel that. Sorry choice of McDonald's. Not Chick-fil-A? Come on, people. At least they take the Sabbath, right? Okay, yes, you were going to say something.
So my husband had said something to the effect of he gave him land to be responsible, being responsible, and I think also setting up for the law, because if you have a law and no land, I guess, that's not what he said.
Yeah.
But if you have you have land, but you don't have something to help you be responsible, or even, you know what I mean, then you're back to square one with where you have to do the regular. Okay.
No, that's great. That's great. Oh, yes. Okay.
We talked about the next step would be giving people rules so that they have boundaries, so that they know what's right and wrong. And with boundaries, you can be more secure. If you don't have if a child doesn't have boundaries, he'll be a lot more anxious. If dad comes in the room and mad at him, and he doesn't know why, he's going to be more anxious. But if he has boundaries, he knows where the limits are. He knows what's right and wrong.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and we all know the impact of that because of parents at Walmart, right? Yeah, when the parents have no boundaries, that kid has a different shopping experience than the ones that do have boundaries. Yeah, you had your hand up.
I guess we were thinking they need to continue the covenants, but bring it on down from the larger to the small and not to the individual.
Right, that's right.
And next, to kind of get them connected. Along on what Jeremy's saying, give them some direction, but make that commitment to them on an individual level. Now he's done the land, he's done the law with the bow, and give them more clarity.
Yeah, so exactly. So you kind of see this is kind of this universal, all of creation feels the effect. He then goes to one. And now out of that one, he is forming the many. So the McDonald's thing actually works very well. But with that, if it's going to be a corporation, if an individual McDonald's didn't make Big Macs, you would kind of go, is it really in McDonald's though? No, it's a Wendy's, and so you have that. So we're starting to see, okay, now through this little speck of land at the crossroads of the world, he's going to build not a mighty nation, but certainly one that was going to influence the world because of its geographic location. And by mighty, I mean just sheer large, I think of mighty, I think of Babylon, Rome, the United States. That's what I think. Israel never saw that, but man, what that little strip of land makes even what they had so significant to the larger story. So now we come into a period of time where Israel is delivered out of slavery. The Amorites. The time of the Amorites had not yet been fulfilled. 400 years. They come into a land, which is the land where the Canaanites live when Joshua comes in. And so one of the arguments that people will make for not believing is, hey, didn't your God of the Old Testament go in and say completely destroy the nations? And the answer to that is not the nations, but a nation, yes. The Canaanites. And he said to slaughter all of them? Right. Yes. How do you justify that with the New Testament? It seems like you're dealing with two different gods. And here's the deal. 400 years. The Canaanites weren't just there without witness to the fact that they're doing something awful. The Canaanites weren't innocent by any stretch of human imagination. They had perfected child sacrifice. We know from Tel Dan what that entailed, a bronze bull-shaped figure that would be superheated you would light a fire within this thing. It would burn to an incredible degree of temperature. They would place their babies in that and beat drums to drown out the cries of their human children as that child was consumed by the heat of the hands of the bull of Molech. We have graves that have been dug up in Tel Dan. This is just northern Israel. Of just countless number of children's bones. It was a real thing. We're not dealing with a culture that valued human life. So it's like, how could God kill all those innocent? Innocent? Who are we to judge that to be innocent? It would almost be like us judging people for doing, I just decided you're going to hell. An equally bad judgment, I decided you're going to heaven without even getting to know you too. We're just not in that place. So God tells them to go in and to destroy them completely. But then in the very next verse he says, and don't intermarry with them. Destroy completely, don't intermarry. Were they completely destroyed? No, definitely not. Hyperbolic language isn't new to us. One team on Sunday, February 11th, will say, we destroyed those guys. It doesn't mean that San Francisco is now completely annihilated. Got to represent my team. And again, you have choices of who you should serve. So Just saying. Yeah, okay, keep going. But you see the type of language that God is using? I want you to take out this nation to the point they can't raise themselves again. But in order for that to happen, I need you not to intermarry. And so, and again, to those that say God does nothing about evil, well, he does. When he does do it, we tend to complain about it. It's just part of our human critique of God who gave us moral law. We use his own law to try to judge him. Never a good idea, but we try to do that anyway. So now we have moral law being given to man through Moses. And so we have this next covenant where God goes, okay, now I'm not only going to deliver you, but I'm going to give you law. You know, I'm going to give you a barometer to gauge what the sin is and what the consequences are. And of course, one of the great finds from last year is this highly debated curse scroll that was found on the very mountain that Joshua and the Israelites stood. One was the Mount of Blessings, the other was the Mount of Curses, and they happened to find this little metal thing in the trash dump that has inscriptions on it that describe how they translate it. You are cursed by God, Yahweh, cursed. You will die, cursed. Cursed, you will surely die. Cursed you are by Yahweh, cursed. They see this little poem written on this thing, and of course it's highly debated because that's how archaeology works. You have this great find, you throw out this ridiculous thing of what you think it is, then the scholastic world beats it up for 20 years, and then they kind of go, yeah, it really does say all that ridiculous thing you said it said in the first place. But right now it's in the abuse stage. If it withstands the abuse stage, because some are saying that's not a scroll, this is a fishing weight that was common at that, and I'm like going, come on, son. What fisherman goes, cursed are you by God, cursed?
One who's not catching.
And then I thought, Peter threw his net out a lot and didn't come up with a lot of things. Maybe he goes, maybe it's the weights. No, it couldn't be that. So it's going to be hotly debated, but I just find it interesting that as we kind of look at this text, as we kind of look at this entrance into the land, the law becomes the very thing. If you break this, you will be cursed. This is the first covenant that's now bilateral. God's going to be faithful, and he's asking you to be faithful. And if you're not faithful, there are consequences. There are sacrifices. There are things to be done. There are things to be done to your neighbor. There are things to be done between you and God. It now teaches us that, hey, I can't just sin and feel like, well, it's tough for everyone else, but I just need to work it out with God. God goes, no, when you sin against me, but you also sin against your neighbor. So therefore, there's going to be animal sacrifices, because guess who that fed? It didn't just appease God, although he did get the fatty portions that smell really yummy. But he then said the meat of those fatty portions, you need to feed the community. You need to come together. You need to be as one. These sacrifices were actually kind of what we would call barbecues today. But imagine you were making it right for someone that you grossly offended by your crossing over into their life. God's expectation is that there would be table fellowship for anyone that you have wronged. And he kind of lays that out in the law. And it teaches us kind of this other thought that other Christian thinkers have brought into this discussion of evil. What if suffering is necessary for our salvation? And the argument goes like this. So God gives man free will. Man chooses to sin. If there are no moral consequences, meaning no human suffering, then there's no reason to stop sinning. Sin continues unabated. Man turns away from God, Man is eternally lost in sin, and there's still no remedy for human suffering. So the argument is this: if God doesn't introduce some sort of natural consequence to the wrong that is done, man will continue to go as he did in Genesis 6. It will happen like that all over again. So what does God do? He introduces suffering. He allows suffering as a form of moral consequences. So man now is accountable for actions. Man knows that sin is evil. Man depends on God for reconciliation. Man can be redeemed from sin by accepting, Christ and the future life where human suffering is absent. So these last two parts would come later. But you see in the law, this is exactly what the law is teaching Israel. There are consequences. And suffering, unfortunately, is part of the choice that I'm allowing you to make. It has to follow this way. Because once you start to realize that the suffering that I'm going through now is the fruit of my own choices. Not natural evil, but the moral evil that I'm suffering with now. This becomes this great teacher. And to be honest, those of us who are raised as good old-fashioned heathens, we know exactly what this is like. You kind of come to an end of what you think you can do, and you're just kind of going, God, I don't know if you even care for me at this point. But if you can do something, moral consequences is almost a kindness in this sense. It's the bottom of the attic where they finally hit the bottom and they start to look for help. It's the moment of not heartbreak again, where you kind of go, I have to do this another way in my relationships. It's the price is too great for me to settle for this easy escapism that I've been buying into. Every time I do, I pay a heavy toll for that. And so you kind of go, is there some good in suffering? Yeah, some. I wouldn't lead with this in a deep philosophic discussion. But I do think it is part of the discussion, because chances are the person I'm having that discussion with has gone through some stuff. And without that stuff, we wouldn't be talking about God. And so I usually end with that. If you hadn't gone through what you've gone through and felt consequences of that, would we be having this discussion right now? And so I do think that does have some sort of power to it, some sort of thing to it that doesn't explain the natural, but certainly explains the moral. And through the law, God is training Israel and the rest of the world who is going through that little area of land. Hey, you've got to become aware and take ownership of the choices that you make. So this is the first bilateral covenant that God makes with man, and its consequences are based off the faithfulness of man. It comes with great blessing, but also introduces the idea of curses. But it was temporary. It wasn't meant to last forever. As Paul would say at a very scandalous moment in Jewish history, it's our babysitter. Now we need to be grown-ups. We kind of go, "Ooh, Paul, don't hurt him so bad." No wonder he got kicked out of synagogues, But it was never meant to be the fulfillment, but the placeholder for God as he starts to reveal this plan of redemption and dealing with evil. Evil has to be shown for what it is. So what do? You add law. But then along with law, you also add consequences of those that know the law and then choose to break it. That becomes the great teacher of the soul of humanity. And it's one that whether people believe in God or not, they're all under this thing too, because we now at this point, because of the moral choices we make, these consequences are universal. That's why everyone goes, killing others is bad. We know this. How do you know this? Well, because you're religious? No, we just figured out none of us is going to last if we don't figure out not to kill one another. Normal consequences lead humanity to an agreed there needs to be a standard, there needs to be a law, and God goes, over here, look at me, I wrote a book about it, you should read it. And so this is where we're at this placeholder. We have a couple more covenants to go, but we're going to take about a 10-minute break, to which everyone says, hallelujah. All right, so let's go for 10 minutes. So for the sake of time, we're gonna just kind of jump. We're gonna jump ahead to this next covenant, and this is the covenant of lordship that God was going to place through David's line a king on the throne that would finally satisfy the gap between Abraham's covenant, Israel's inability to fully satisfy every aspect of the law. They're learning that without the sacrifice in the temple, they can never fully stay in God's presence. There always needs to be something going in between them and God. They're showing, and that at some point there is going to be a king, not just a king, but also a priest and king who could do all of this at one time. It was going to be someone from the line of David, a covenant that God makes with David so that all of the world can see. And so Israel is always looking for a David-like king, someone that is going to, at some point, grab that line and grab Israel and be that intercessory between them and God. It's going to happen. This covenant is something only God can do, something only God can provide. And Israel is excited and they're waiting. And they think they may have hit pay dirt with Solomon because things go well for a while until he gets married and again gets married and again gets married and then takes on about 1,000 side dimes and pieces and starts making room for all the other spiritual wannabes that are out there. And then his sons start the great civil war and divide the kingdom. And boy, that was short-lived. But they hold on to this hope because God has been faithful. God is continually revealing that this is going to come. And so then when the exile happens, and God uses foreign nations to come in and humble Israel and take the very land that God said, this is part of my covenant. But then through the law saying, if you don't hold on to this, eventually these things will happen. Well, God proves to be a good parent. And it happens. And there are several prophets that I think kind of echo the larger story, but none as good as Habakkuk. Habakkuk comes in at a time when the Babylons are on the move. They are pressing. They are coming for it. Nebuchadnezzar is on the warpath, and eventually Israel is going to fall. The book is broken down into 3 major complaints dealing with evil and with suffering. Complaints that are kind of universal at this point. Why didn't you stop your people's sinfulness? Why did you just let it get to this point, God? We know you could have done something. And he goes, well, here's my answer. I am raising up the Chaldeans. Say what? Why didn't you stop? Well, because I'm going to use a foreign nation to humble them. It was a question of God's inactivity, which then ultimately is going to lead to the judgment for Judah. You have the second complaint. As Babylon comes, he goes, how could you use worse people to judge your bad people? My words, not Habakkuk's, but that's essentially what he's saying. How could you use worse people? God then answer is like the vision waits its appointed time. Wait for it. You're going to see. You're going to see. My people have turned to evil. And they're getting the fruit, the natural consequences of when you put all your hope in evil systems. An evil system will eventually devour you. And then, of course, this is a question of God's inconsistency. Why would you use evil to destroy evil? And then, of course, he kind of goes, well, because Babylon will show the world what eventually will happen. And he kind of pronounced these 5 woes for Babylon. All of these things you will find interesting as you read the book of Revelation. As God is kind of continually building this kind of the pattern, like, you know what, guys, you're not very creative as humans. You're just not. Everything seems to go in certain patterns. You always have people getting on their white horses trying to go out and to conquer. And with that, they bring pestilence and plague and famine and crisis and inflation. And it's just, guys, it's the same system. You're trusting in the same issues. You're always kind of playing Babylon. Stop it. It's going to end the way it always does. So here, this pattern is being kind of shown for the first time. The prophet asks for an answer, and he goes, just wait. The third complaint is, what you have done, do again, judge and save. Okay, I see your hand in the deliverance of people. Here's my prayer. Here's my request. And Habakkuk at this point, it says, I will quietly wait. I will rejoice. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. The question of God's inability has been answered, and judgment is going to come. But the prophet comes to this conclusion before Babylon gets what's coming to them, which is kind of the faith of Abraham. Trusting God when God doesn't make sense. You know, that is the core part of all of this. You know, and the fact that through the prophet Habakkuk, it says, all nations someday will answer to God who judges and saves. Someday the earth will be filled with the knowledge and the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the seas. But today, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. This is a journey from confusion and gloom to trust and praise, which is a perfect little book when dealing with pain and suffering. It doesn't necessarily justify everything that someone has gone through, but it does show that God is always paying attention. God is at work. Paul would say it later, God works for the good. Doesn't say that it's all good. It just says that whatever has come into your life, God is going to find a way to redeem some good out of this. And I think this is probably seen best as Israel literally is watching all of the covenants come crashing down on their head. The kingdom that David built has now been destroyed. The land we've been taken out of the land. We are now just resting in the fact that he just doesn't turn the bow on us now and just end it all. You know, and yet through the prophets, you know, we see God kind of pointing to this larger return, to this amazing moment. And this is these are some of the highlights from this book that I'm just going to throw out at you very quickly. Look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Though the fig should not blossom, nor fruit be on its vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, there will be no herds in the stall, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Where does the prophet find his hope? He finds his hope in the pattern and the promise of all of this, knowing that at some point, God is going to finally act and settle all that has been made wrong. And so we have these covenants, the bow, the land, the law, the Lord. But then, of course, the most important covenant comes with Jesus. You know, who in Matthew 26 says, this is the covenant in my blood. You know, Jesus is the perfect Lord because he comes as the perfect Israelite. You know, all the Gospels are written in such a way that no matter what background or what covenant you're looking towards, he kind of serves and answers it all. He goes in and says, yeah, the bow's got to be aimed at someone. It's got to be aimed at God. God has no reason to be shot with a bow, so what good would that do? Well, man has a reason to be destroyed, so how is God going to solve that one? Well, he's got to come as both God and man. And in that form, God and man, he has got to stand in that place and let the wrath of that ancient covenant be felt. And so Jesus absorbs the blow. You know, in the covenant of land, he comes into the land and kind of comes to that which was his own, but his own did not accept him. And he kind of comes in and he kind of completely satisfies that promise of I am going to pass through the pieces. The people of the land have failed the covenant, but they're not going to have to pay the price of that failure. I'm going to pay it for you. Make me as one of these animals. And his side was pierced, and his body was split, and his blood was shed. He satisfies the covenant perfectly. He then comes in and kind of goes, well, all of law has got to be satisfied. There's got to be this position where there's always going to be a high priest and one that is going to take on that which was done in ritual, but now needs to be done in permanence. And of course, that is what the book of Hebrews is trying to argue through its whole beautiful dissertation of just how Jesus is the perfect solution to that covenant. He satisfies it all. He goes in as king and priest and kind of becomes all of that because of his sacrifice, because of the power of an indestructible life, one that was able to express the intent of the law, not just the letter of the law, yet satisfies the letter of the law because he lives out the intent in everything he does. And as we follow him, the law gets satisfied through his sacrifice because he ultimately is that king who is going to stand in the place of God and man and kind of say, come and follow me. And so you have one last covenant, and it's the covenant of blood, which perfectly satisfies all the other ways that God has chosen to deal and interact and work with pain, suffering, and evil. It's a part of life. And it's not the most popular answer to just say, well, in Jesus, we will find our hope. But it is the right one. And so through this big picture, this overarching narrative of God's interaction with Israel, we find its culmination in one spot that makes all of it so approachable in Jesus. So, any questions? Yes?
At the beginning, you said that the bow to the Hebrews would be understood as a bow, and it's aimed upwards. Do you think the people back then understood that that was God saying that he was going to take it on himself?
Well, I think like most great communities, when they're confronted with the divine, I think there was a lot of, shoulder shrug, not totally sure. I just think they would have been relieved and confused and confounded and curious. Why isn't it aimed at us? Because a covenant sign was something that you could use to remind the people in the covenant what the terms were. And so every once in a while, God would kind of send that, there'd be rain. Is he doing it again? And then the sign. No, he's not. He's not going to destroy us. Oh, good. High five, everyone. Fives around. Well, what's it aimed at? We don't know. It's just not aimed at us. I'm not sure if it was deep or if they really did have that kind of like, I don't know who this God is, but I'm glad he's taken the blow. So good question. Yeah. Yes?
Why do you think he waited so long to give the law? And why was he so angry if he didn't really know what the law was at that point?
Are you talking about other nations? Or are you talking about Israel?
Like Noah's time, before he officially gave them the law. Why was he so angry at them if they didn't have the law yet?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is found in the fact that man's intent and every inclination of his heart was on evil all the time. And so God at that point, being God, was able to flex his divine right as creator and say, I can do something about that. And I think, and again, I think that's, and we feel that. Why doesn't God just wipe out all the evil in the world? Not realizing we would be swept away along with everyone else if he did. It would be his right. But because of grace, as he, afterwards, he goes, yeah, never again. Never again. So, again, the emotional health of God, I trust implicitly. I don't think he gets mad like we do, but I do think at times he chooses to do what is in his right to do. And I think that's one of those times. Yeah.
I think this kind of answers a question that I've been working through this week, but I'm not entirely sure. And it has to do with Romans 9, when Paul is talking about the argument with Jacob and Esau, and how God hated Esau but loved Jacob, and this was even before they were born, before they had done anything good or evil. So, like I said, I think this maybe answers it, but I haven't zeroed in on it yet.
Yeah, and again, we're dealing with terms and nicknames for nations, in Paul quoting that passage. Moab, again, was one of those antagonistic. These were Israel's cousins, descendants of a brother from way back, and they became the antagonists to a lot of hurt and destruction in Israel. And so this idea of hatred towards a nation is more of a statement of, I see what has gone on. And again, if you read the minor prophets, you see how God chooses to address them. Like, hey, all of these things you've done, I've noticed, and it's going to come back. Israel I have chosen, but not to, not at your despair. Moab was quite blessed by God, just like Esau was back then. But God was going to make right and honor his choice through covenant with Israel, that he was going to set Moab right. So Paul is simply laying out that all of these others, Jews, good, faithful Christian Jews, all of these others have always been a part of it. And yet at the same time, our chosenness doesn't mean it's to the loss of everyone else. Our chosenness was just a temporary statement to the world of, you were destined to come to me, but you're going to come to me through Israel, not through any other means.
Okay. Processing.
Is it recorded? Okay. You
Oh,
can go back and watch.
yeah. Yes.
Originally, you were talking about the difference between natural evil and moral evil. And I think, I wasn't sure past that beginning statement when you talked about free will, what you were really indicating we could point to in relation to natural evil. Why do bad things happen to good people, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think when that comes up, there's this great little statement in the book of Revelation of this calls for patience, endurance on the parts of the saints. All of this tragedy that's going on in the world, God expects the saints to rise up and live faithfully towards those people, to be his ambassadors. As these things come up, as we have covered a world that is constantly moving and changing and building our cities and places that are along fault lines and tornado alleys and things like that, that there has to be this kind of empathetic, godlike response on behalf of the saints to go and to try to address that. It doesn't easily answer why. And I leave that part up to, I'm not sure why God just, there's that one town in Oklahoma that seems to get hit every year with tornadoes and they keep rebuilding the town. I'm not sure, why. When we kind of go, well, don't build your house there. But if that's where, I'm on inherited land. This is the land, this is all I have. Where would I go? No one's going to pay for this, especially now that tornadoes rip through here. Oh, I got to put my place up for sale. I'll never make it anywhere else. This is what I've inherited. This is mine. I just can't go somewhere, and then you kind of go, well, okay, if that's how, then can't God make the tornadoes go somewhere else? Yeah, maybe. But it didn't. And so, yeah, I don't have a quick, easy answer. I do have a faith that man, when bad times happen, it's meant to bring out the good in those that are going to reflect God to a hostile world. That we'll get in there and suffer right along with them. We'll make sure they know that they're not alone. We'll make sure they know that they aren't just being prayed for, but they're being served. Because that's how we see God treating us. That he comes into the world and does as much as he can. And so, yeah, it's not a satisfactory answer, but that's the only one I really have. I think maybe someone more trained in apologetics could give you a better response, but I just kind of go, yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. Yeah.
This is opinion, but I was in an F3 tornado in 1996 in a house.
Gosh.
And I thought I was going to die. The house was moving. The tornado was right there. So, but I don't believe that all natural disasters are just totally random. I thought I was going to die. We thought we were going to die. There was another brother there with me. He prayed first. I think he was depressed. He prayed, God, if you want to take us, just take us now. And I didn't like that prayer.
God, what he meant to say was, please take him.
Rescue me. So I didn't like the prayers. I prayed a different prayer. We were grabbing on the carpet, and we got through that. We lived. We weren't harmed physically. The house was totally. I didn't own the house. I was renting from them.
Sure.
So yeah, I think God spared us. It shook our lives up. I had to move to a different place. It caused changes in my life. But yeah, I don't think it's always random.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah.
And I was going to add, I appreciate what you brought up about patience. Studying Job and thinking about sitting with him and waiting till he speaks. This topic feels like it's a certain way of categorizing the world. Some people and some Christians can fall into, I think, a trap of maybe trying to comfort someone with platitudes like God has a plan, or let's try to think about maybe what you did that caused this.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm talking to my friend whose parents died in a car crash because he had
Oh my gosh.
on the road,
Yeah.
and it's like, what did he do, right? But you talk about patience and serving, and I think that's where you're trying to bring hope, and you're trying to, it's a long game. So I even think that relates to the question of why did it take so long, right? Some of this stuff is a long game, and I think in our culture, we don't like long games.
Yeah. Well, and it explains the temptation of Job's 3 friends to try to come up with some quick, easy solution, which we're not supposed to imitate. And I do think, for all of their faults, the one thing they did right, their best move was when they just sat and kept their mouth shut. They were sitting Shiva. But as soon as Shiva was done, they started spouting off a lot of nonsense, which just drove Job and all of us readers insane. 30 chapters? Really, friends? You had to do 30 chapters? You know what I'm saying? It's like, come on, man. This is the same argument all over again. But the one thing they didn't do was leave. And even as wrong as they were, they had that part right. And I think sitting in sharing of suffering may be the greatest aspect of ministry we do for the earth now. And it is where I see, the charge of the early church and its devotion to the poor, its patience in dealing with people. You see the expansion of Christianity even being tied to their patience. They're willing to pick up the orphans off the side of the street. They're willing to pick up under severe persecution people who are being mistreated. They're willing to just bear with it. In fact, if you look at early Christian art, now we're getting into where my wheelhouse is. If you look at early Christian art, the most repeated portrait that you see isn't like the cross or the foot washing, of which those exist. But the most repeated image is the image of Jonah diving into the sea. And they read it allegorically. We kind of go, well, wasn't Jonah kind of thrown in because this was his fault? They didn't read it like that, but allegorically it goes, we are leaving the safety of the world and we're diving into the chaos of this world because we know on the other end of it, we're going to be delivered. So let's dive into the chaos because we trust in the sign of Jonah that Jesus promised. This was our early brothers and sisters' faith. This is how they saw the world. Rome brought a lot of chaos and a lot of order all at the same time. The evil that was there, they were like going, we are going to be patient. We are going to stay in there. We're going to stay with people. We are going to love even when we're not loved back. And again, I think that's honestly what we are as a church really good at. When tragedy strikes, I know what this group would do, without a doubt. And you would do it well, yeah. Yeah, it is the ministry of reconciliation. We're Christ's ambassadors. But Christ came to the hurting, to the wounded, to the suffering. We join in that long parade of fellow sufferers and hurters, but we bring with us the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And we get to reflect something. And it's hard. Just before just before I drove here, I met with someone who, one of those great stories, they weren't born in church, but they were on the pew probably the next Sunday. Grew up Church of Christ, been faithful all their life, and they're one of those Church of Christ folks that just was all about evangelism. They're much older now, much older than you guys, but they're much older now, and he is, for the first time in his faith, is really going through it. He's restricted to a wheelchair. He still has lots of energy. His mind is sharp as a tack, but his body is falling apart. He now has been on top of all this physical ailment, being diagnosed with ALS. And he's gonna go, and I'm going to lose my mind. Are you kidding? And you walk through and you see pictures of people that look nothing like them. And you who are them? Who are these guys? And they're all people that they've helped convert all around the world. This is what they've devoted their life to. And he's sitting there struggling, going, why? Am I any good? Why all this? And it's funny. It was like going, funny you should bring that up. And so I go, I know this isn't going to help you. But let me tell you the story. And God could, but he didn't see any real change of heart. So he shifted tactics and just started looking for someone with faith. And when he found it, he even made a covenant with him that Abraham himself wasn't allowed to go through, because he would ultimately satisfy that covenant. And then, as he introduces law and showed the ugly mirror to society, what it really looked like from the point of view of heaven, it wasn't pretty, and it was meant to show us who we really are just on our own, how awful our sin is, and how unholy we are just by our very nature. And God was trying to provide a way through that time, but it wasn't going to be fulfilled until the king, the real king, came, to which you answered the call. You chose to follow him, and you've given your life to him. And now you're in a season of life where you're feeling what a lot of people have felt everywhere, but you're not feeling it just for you. I pointed to all the pictures in the room. You have a lot of eyes on you who wants to know how to die well. I prayed for a miracle. I pulled out some oil and I'm like, hey, why not? Let's give it a shot. But I go, but brother, even if it doesn't. They go to our church now. That part of the story, I wonder. They didn't just call me randomly. I've known them for a little while. But brother, let me tell you, this might be your greatest call. And you're not going to have to go through it alone. And I think that's maybe where the unsatisfying but yet dignity-giving role that we're supposed to play in people's lives. So I don't know. That seems like a good place to end.